Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another very special, as always, hyper-conscious mastermind. Today we have a very special guest who is a client and becoming a friend of mine. He has a podcast called Tomorrow's Leader. He has spoken all over the world in front of thousands of people. He was in the financial services industry for many years, and he has been a leader for many years as well, leading all sorts of different groups. But as you're going to hear from John, leading yourself is the most important thing. You are the most important person that you lead, and John is going to talk about that today. So John Laurito, welcome, my friend, and I will let you do your thing.
Awesome. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate the appearance and the opportunity to speak to everybody here. And I want to make this as interactive as we can. So as you have questions, certainly shout them out. I guess the way we'll do it is just click on, raise your hand. Is that right, guys? And then you have questions, just shout them out. That's fine. So I'm going to cover a lot of stuff. There's so much. I'm passionate about leadership. And, as I know, Kevin and Alan, and probably a lot of you know, leadership, even if you're a formal leader leading a company, leading an organization, leading a team, it all starts with leading yourself. If you can't lead yourself, ultimately, you're not going to be an effective leader. So I'm going to talk today about some of the things. I spent 20 years running companies as CEO of either failing companies, trying to turn them around, and successful, trying to make them better. And all of these are leadership principles that I learned how to adapt to myself. And now I work with people in all different industries and walk of life on how to lead themselves better. So I just want to start. We're going to do a little quiz here. I want to see if anybody knows who this is. Anybody recognize that face?
Nope.
Okay. So that's a guy named David Brailsford. I don't know if anybody knows that name. Does anybody know that name? Okay, that's okay. I didn't know who he was before I heard about him, but he's the British cycling coach back in 2003. And if you've ever heard about this, so the British cycling team in 2003 was absolutely really, really not good. So they had gone 95 years literally without any kind of medal, any kind of championship. And they were so bad that bike manufacturers would not allow them to wear would not let them wear their materials. Literally, they didn't want their name associated with them at all. So they ultimately brought in Dave Brailsford, and Dave decided he believed in something called the law of the aggregation of marginal gains, which basically means you take all these little things and add them up, and over time, it's going to amount to big differences in the results. So he just, got the team together and he said, okay, we know we haven't had success. Let's just throw out on the table all the little things that are going to make a difference. I don't care what it is, whatever kind of idea you have that will make at least a 1% difference in the performance, in our performance, then let's consider it as an option. So they started doing all these things. I mean, literally, and things that made sense. They had better training. They started to try out different uniforms. They found out that the indoor suits actually were more aerodynamic than the outdoor ones. They tested different recovery gels. They actually started doing even crazy things like bringing their pillows with them because it led to a better night's sleep. They had surgeons train them even how to wash their hands because it led to less infections and less downtime because of being sick. They started rubbing alcohol on the tires for better grip. They even painted the inside of the vans white so that it picked up dust particles and all this kind of stuff. And all these little things, each and every one of them didn't really seem like it would make any kind of a difference. It's like, okay, why are we doing this? But what happened is over the course of time, it transformed their team. In fact, in 2008, they started on a massive winning streak. I'll read some of this to you. They set in the Beijing Olympics, they won 60% of the gold medals. In the 2012 London Olympics, they set 9 Olympic records and 7 world records. And then between 2012 and 17, they won 5 out of 6 Tour de France. So it was like this unbelievable major transformation, and it all came from just these tiny little adjustments that each singular one didn't seem like it was going to make that big of a difference, but it totally transformed the entire team and the whole sport, really, for that matter. So I bring this up only because this is exactly what leadership is really about. It's thinking about all the little tiny things. Most people are looking for the magic switch. Okay, how do I become a better leader? How do I turn my life around? How do I turn an organization around? It doesn't just come from one thing. It ultimately is the aggregation of all these small things. So I'm going to go through 6 things that I know, and I've had the pleasure of working with ultra successful people, individuals, athletes, company leaders, organizations, and ultimately there are 6 things that I've seen individuals do that help them lead a better life. Okay, so I'm gonna throw these out. I'm gonna tell some stories. I'm gonna ask some questions, and again, as you have them, feel free to ask them. So the first,
Amber wanted to know who the coach of that team was. She heard the story. She wanted to know the
sure,
name.
it's David Brailsford. So it's Brailsford. So David Brailsford.
Perfect.
Yeah, really, really cool story. So, and there's a book called Habits by James Clear. I think it's Habits. It's something Habits. Atomic Habits. You got it. And that story is in there. So if you want to get even in depth on it, really, really cool stuff. So let's talk about the first area, and that is decisions. So if you think about it, life is just about how do you make better decisions, right? If you can string together really good decisions and you can do it consecutively, that's where you see people like totally transform their life, right? And it sounds like, great, okay, that's obvious. And, I just need to make better decisions. But in reality, that's hard. We know we're going to make bad decisions, and that's okay. That's part of life. We know we're going to do that, and we got to learn from it. But I'm going to give you a couple of things that can help you make better decisions, because all you have to do, again, is get 1% better in decision making. That's it. And can you avoid some of the bad decisions and a couple of the doozies that you might make once a year or once a month, whatever, and that itself would transform your whole life. So I want you to think for a minute. Think about the worst decision you've ever made, or think about a bad decision that you've made, a pretty big one, let's say even in the last year, and just get that in your mind for a minute. Painful to think about sometimes. I know I think about some that I've made. I'm like, geez, I want to ignore them, but and forget about them. But what's the one thing that tends to cause us to make more bad decisions than anything else?
Lack of knowledge, lack of clarity.
Could be lack of clarity, lack of knowledge.
Unresourceful state.
Okay. Share a little more about that.
So I have an acronym, HALT, HALLT. If you're hungry, horny, angry, lonely, late, or tired, Alan, it's time to halt.
Okay.
Step back and try to hyper-consciously think of what decision you're about to make.
Awesome. So I look at that even in a broader sense. If we take a step back, a lot of those fall into one category and one word, and that is emotions, right? When we have emotions cloud our decision making, we tend to make bad decisions. And I'm not talking about just negative emotions. I'm not talking about just anger, frustrated. If we're depressed, if we're stressed, we know we're going to make bad decisions during that period of time. But has anybody made a bad decision when they've been at a positive high, like a euphoric state, overconfident? I've made bad decisions when I've been overconfident before. So one of the keys is to decision making. Can you strip away the emotions? Can you be aware of it? And that's where sometimes having a partner, a coach, a life partner, a mentor can really help, because they're going to take away that emotion sometimes that you can't strip away. Okay, so that's number one. With that in mind, I see people all the time make long-term decisions based on short-term stuff. And a lot of times that leads to really bad decisions. And I see it with careers all the time. I see people make career changes because they need some sort of a temporary increase of income. They're frustrated. Maybe they're having a bad day or bad relationship with their boss. They have one person in their life, which might be a boss or a coworker, that's pushing them to make a long-term decision. So they're trying to solve a short-term problem with a long-term decision, and it's sometimes disastrous. And you've got to look at everything that you're doing. I'll give you a good example. I was on vacation with my family. My son a year ago, when we were on this vacation, ate this monstrous sub, like meatball sub. And he's been talking about it for a year. He's like, Dad, you got to try this. It's like unbelievable. He's like, it's an 18-inch meatball parm sub. And he said, and he was really proud because he had finished it. Now, I remember seeing him when he came after he had eaten it, and he was like a zombie for the rest of the night. It like took him out of, he was just stuffed. But he's like, Dad, this vacation, you got to have it. You got to have it. So I'm like, okay, all right. Okay. I prepped. I didn't eat that day. It's in the afternoon, and I go and I eat this. I go to see this. I go to buy this sub. I go there. It's not an 18-inch sub. We measured it. It's 24 inches. I don't know if you've ever seen I can't even do it on my screen here, but 24-inch sub. is enormous. And I'm like immediately intimidated by this thing. So I'm like, okay, well, I can't not do this. So I go about, I start eating the thing, and I get halfway in. I'm really fun. I've got my whole family there. They're all like watching. This is like this fun thing. Let's see, dad and I've got my niece and nephew there. Let's see our uncle, barf. And so I'm eating this thing. I get to that. I do the first half. I get halfway through the second half, and I just realize I am stuffed. And I'm like, you know what? I think I could do this. I think if I really pushed, I could do this. But if I did, it would absolutely ruin the rest of my day on vacation. I know I'd be out of commission. I'd be like, whatever. And I'm like, you know what, Nick, I'll give you the pleasure. I'm not going to finish it. You win this and that. And I'm like, so what it made me realize though, is sometimes we do things because we just want that short-term victory, but we don't think about the consequence. In that case, the short-term pride victory was not worth the consequence of the pain I was going to have for the rest of that day. It just wasn't worth it when I started to think about it. Now, there might be other things where, hey, you know what? That would be worth it. I do want to tackle this because there's long-term rewards, or there's consequences for not doing it that I don't want to bear, I don't want to pay. So we've always got to think about that what is the consequence of the decision we're making? Here's a good way to think about this. This is something, I know I'm going fast, so stop me when I get rolling, I go fast.
Amber has a question.
Amber,
yes.
Hand in the participants chat.
What's up, Amber?
What do we got?
We cannot hear you.
If you raised your hand in the chat, and if you have a question, because we can't hear your mic right now,
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yay. Okay. Sorry. No, he asked the question. I was just going to chip in because I think sometimes we make bad decisions when we have unclear values. So it's like, oh, okay, we don't really necessarily know, so we'll just do whatever, without really thinking about what really matters to me, So that's what I was going to say.
Mm-hmm. Amber, you are so spot on with that. And that was actually going to be another topic there, is the importance of making values-based decisions, because you're so absolute accurate. There's a lot of times people aren't aware of their values. One of the takeaways I would say, and to give you and I've got a values exercise, a really cool worksheet that helps you figure it out. If you want that afterwards, we can get my info out, and I'm happy to send that to you because it's a really cool exercise. And I go through it like once a year, because sometimes you either forget or sometimes your values over time may change. But if you know what your core values are, it makes decision-making so much easier. Because if you do make decisions that don't line up with your values, let's say, family is one of your core values, family and relationships. If you took a job that was out of state and you were seeing your family less, and maybe that was because you took the job because of the money, but if it wasn't allowing you to see your family, eventually there's going to be this internal rub. It may be 6 months from now, maybe a year from now, maybe 2, but eventually there's going to be a breakdown. And the reason is because you're not living in alignment with your values. So that's such a great point, Amber. Absolutely. Here's a really cool little test also that you can use. I call this the 10-10-10 rule. Anytime I'm making a big decision, I use the 10-10-10 rule. And that is, how am I going to feel 10 minutes after I make this decision? How am I going to feel 10 months after I make this decision? And how am I going to feel 10 years after I make this decision? And that simple exercise, 10 minutes, 10 months, 10 years, can sometimes help you figure out, okay, you know what? No, this doesn't make sense. I've used this with other people, and they're like, yeah, you know what? Short term, that would feel good, but that doesn't get me any closer. In fact, it gets me further away from where I'm trying to get long term. Really simple way to kind of put your eyes on what might be a potential problem. The last thing I'll say on this is sometimes it makes sense to take the decision-making out of the equation to make a better decision. And here's where I'm talking about. And I did one of my podcast episodes recently on this. I don't know about you, but when I go to the food store, I'm really bad when I go to the food store because I overbuy all the time. And I do this when I do the shopping at the worst time, when I'm hungry. And I went there recently, and I just moved into my new place in North Carolina, and so I had an empty fridge. I had to stock it up, and I'm like, okay, let me go there. I went with my daughter and my niece, and I've never spent, and I'm not proud of this, I'm embarrassed by this. I've never spent so much at a supermarket in my life. I got to the cash register and I could not believe what this totaled up to. And I even asked the girl that was checking me out, I'm like, is this like a record? Like, have you ever seen a bill this high? She's like, no, actually, I haven't. I'm like, really? I'm like, I was kidding actually, but I seriously, like I set the store record. This is like horrible. Do I get my name up somewhere or is there a plaque? But the bottom line is I left the decision-making of what I was going to buy in the hands of my, hunger state, when I was there versus writing a list out beforehand. Then I don't have a decision to make, right? So then I'm going to be doing things more in alignment with my goals. If I'm working out and if I pre-plan my workout, then when I wake up in the morning and I'm not feeling good and I'm like tired, then I don't have anything to think about. I've just got to follow my workout plan. If I'm creating it that day when I go to the gym, I'm probably going to be a little easier on myself, right? So sometimes the best decision that you can make is take the decision-making process out of it, okay? Take away the decision. So hopefully that makes sense. I'll move on to the next one. We can come back with any questions on this, but I know I tend to just talk, so just stop me if I'm going too fast. So here's another one. So the first one is decisions. The second one that I see really top people that really lead themselves really well is it comes down to perspective. And perspective is how you see yourself and also how you see your world around you. And there's a few different things that I would mention in this with really successful people. Sometimes, I don't know if you've ever been sitting there and you're thinking about, and sometimes this gets really frustrating. You think about where you are right now versus where your ideal self is, what your end goal is, your vision. And that's motivating sometimes. But I don't know about you, but I can get really frustrated. Kevin helps me on my podcast, does a phenomenal job with everything. I didn't know what I was doing at all. And I get frustrated. He and I were talking earlier today. I'm like, I get frustrated because I think about where I want to get this thing to, and where it is now is like, 1/1000% of where I want it to get to. And that can be frustrating. But successful people focus, that's the gap between where we are and where we want to be. Successful people focus on the progress. So Kevin's always good to point out to me, hey, look at where you started from. I mean, man, it's been 4 months. You're growing, you're building. And where I was last month is not where I am now. And I'm making progress every single day. So that's the perspective that successful people and successful leaders have. Okay, that's one piece of it. Here's another part of it, is how do you measure yourself and your progress? Do you measure it based on your goals, or are you kind of measuring yourself against other people? Anybody out there competitive? Yep, big time, right? Alan is. I am too. So sometimes, I went mountain biking this weekend, and it was like this 13-mile mountain bike ride. It was with my brother-in-law, and I borrowed a friend's bike, and I'll come back and tell a couple other stories about that. But I just want to get a really good workout. I wanted this to be a really great burn. I wanted to burn a lot of calories. I want to have some fun. That was my goal. My brother-in-law is a thrill seeker. Like, he's a guy that will just bomb down the hill and take all kinds of risks and do all kinds of crazy stuff. And at first I was following him, and I'm kind of adapting my style and really changing my goals because I was with him, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll try and do this kind of crazy stuff. And then I realized, you know what? I'm getting further away from what I'm trying to do. I'm not getting as good of a workout. I'm not enjoying it as much. And it just reminded me that we've got to stick to our own goals. Measure your progress against yourself. Sometimes we can get distracted measuring by other people. Here's another interesting concept. Our perspective sometimes changes when we take a step in a direction. If I'm sitting there on the shoreline and I'm trying to map my journey out, sometimes we don't even begin the journey because we don't know what step 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 looks like. We don't know exactly the whole course. I don't know. Some of you may be that type of person. You got to see the whole picture and the whole journey and know every step of the process before you even launch the boat. But what's really interesting is when you do put the boat in the water and you do start, moving or paddling or driving the boat, your whole vantage changes. You see things that you didn't see before because you were stuck on the shore. And on the shoreline, you can only see so much. When you get out there, you start to see the whole picture. And you start to see different things that you never would have seen. You see possibilities, you see avenues, you see places you want to go. It starts to connect the dots. You start to realize what you need to do. And that's part of what successful people realize. Listen, I don't need to have everything mapped out and chart it out before I start that journey. Hey guys, I'm going to take a quick break. I've got this sun beaming through my window here. You can probably see this. So if we want to tee up any questions, hold on. Let me just, because that's probably annoying you as much as
No worries, no worries. I was thinking that's probably blinding him.
Yeah, seriously.
Little by little.
You want to check with that message?
No, we're going to be fine. We're going to be just fine.
So I have a question. We might as well tee some questions up. So I wanted to ask you this. I like misunderstandings. I think that you talk about good decisions, right? We can only make decisions to the level of our current awareness. I see people making fitness decisions based on false data constantly, and it hurts my heart. What is the biggest misunderstanding in leadership from your perspective?
I think people feel like they have to have, in order to lead other people or themselves, they have to have all the answers. They have to know everything. And because they don't, then they don't do anything. And ultimately, then they're not helping themselves and they're not helping other people. So if you just think about, again, I don't need to go from not winning a trophy or a medal for 95 years to then setting all kinds of records. All I need to do is get 1% better, and that's it. And if I'm 1% better in something than other people, then I'm in a position to influence them to get even better themselves. So that's all. And I'm looking for people that are even 1% better than me to influence me. And that's it. That's all you have to think about. Most people are under that misconception they need to have all the answers.
Oh, that's so powerful. I've been guilty of that in the past for sure.
Same.
Yeah. Everybody is. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Yep. Do we have another question? Or
No, we're good.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Okay. Yep. So let's talk about the third item, and this is one that I think is really important too. I see very successful leaders and individuals that really accomplish a lot in life that are the third word is obstacles, and I'm going to talk about kind of their approach on this because it's really how they deal with them. It's not that they don't have them; it's how they deal with their obstacles and their problems. And I think a lot of times what it comes down to is we tend sometimes to overthink things, first of all. We tend to think that for our problems, there's a really complex answer that we have to find. And oftentimes the answer to our problems or the obstacle that's in front of us is like really pretty basic and easy. There was a truck that got stuck underneath an overpass, a big 18-wheeler. And all kinds of people were around it. It backed up traffic for miles. Nobody knew what to do. How do we get this truck out of here? I mean, it's literally jammed under the underpass. And it was like a little 9-year-old girl that came up with the answer. And she's like, well, why don't you just take the air out of the tires? And everybody was like, that's a great idea. Let's do that. Let's take the air out of the tires. So they took the air out of the tires, and sure enough, they rolled the truck right through. And adults were racking their brains, people with, life, certainly success in life, and they couldn't figure it out. It took a 9-year-old girl's perspective and a simple approach to fix the problem. When I started doing podcasts, and I got this microphone that you see right here, which is a great microphone. I love it. And, I did a lot of research. I found a really good one. It's not a cheap microphone. It's a pretty pricey one. But I hated it when I first got it because it sounded horrible. And I kept working with the guy at the company that sold it to me. And I'm like, listen, you got to help me with this. I mean, what do I have the settings set up wrong or whatever? There's all these buttons in the back. I'm pressing them. I'm trying to figure out what do I set it on? Because it sounds horrible. It sounds tinny. And he's working with me. It must have been 4 or 5 phone calls, literally. And we're downloading programs. I mean, I'm setting all these dials up. And I finally had a call with him. I'm like, listen, man, I'm going to send it back. I'll take a cheapo one because my cheapo one sounds better than this, expensive one. And he's like, well, before we do, can I ask you a question? He said, I don't want to insult you or anything like that. I don't mean this, but you are talking into the side of the mic that has the red label on it, right? And I'm like, what red label? I don't see a red label. And then I go around the back. I'm like, oh, mean the one in the back? He's like, well, that's the problem. You're speaking in the microphone in the wrong side. I'm like, are you kidding me? This whole time, this has been the problem with this mic. I'm speaking in the wrong side. All right. Well, simple solution to my complex problem. But sometimes we overthink things. We also have to know, is something truly an obstacle, or is it just a simple problem? Because I think sometimes we make something to be a bigger problem. So, sometimes other people put things in front of us that they think are an obstacle, and we adopt that as our own obstacle. I mean, literally, and it's really not, and it shouldn't be. We actually may have the resources to easily overcome it, but they can't. So it then is perceived that, okay, well, this is everybody's obstacle. Down here in North Carolina, there's a builder who there's a town, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Cary, North Carolina, but there's a builder that pretty much, almost owns the city of Cary. It's a beautiful city. And he had wanted to put up a building, a 10-story building. And the city of Cary would not allow any building higher than 6 stories. They had a firm policy, requirement that all buildings had to be 6 stories or less. And so he couldn't do it. They went, nope, you can't build a 10-story building. Well, and for years, nobody built any building more than 6 stories. And he asked the question, he said, well, why can't I build a building 10 stories high? And the answer was, well, our fire trucks only go up 6 stories. And he said, okay, well, what if I bought you a fire truck that went up 10 stories? And he said, well, I guess, yeah, then you can build your 10-story building. So he bought them a fire truck that goes up 10 stories. Now, obviously, we're not in a position, all of us, to go buy a fire truck to solve our problems, but he was a, millionaire with, maybe a billionaire with tons of real estate, had the resources, but it was assumed that nobody could do that. And that wasn't a solution that was ever presented. So sometimes we have to look at things creatively and don't just assume that the obstacle that other people are facing is going to be the obstacle that you're facing, or that you are not going to be able to overcome it very easily. I also think we tend to hold on to our problems or the things that hold us back way too long. Has anybody been in a situation where you felt like you had something? I don't care if it was a problem at work, it was something that was stressing you out. Maybe it was a relationship that you were in, something that was a problem or obstacle that was slowing you down or stopping you. And when you look back, you're like, you know what? I held on to that problem way too long.
Oh yeah.
Anybody guilty of that?
Many times.
Absolutely. I have too. What's interesting is our problems, they don't go away. You have to do something to relieve yourself of it, right? So if I ask you right now to fill up a glass of water and hold it out in front of you like this and just keep it suspended, that's not that big of a deal, right? We all can do that. But if I had you do that for this whole presentation, this whole talk, by the end, how would that feel?
Oh yeah.
You'd be like, your arm would be shaking. You'd be like, I can't.
Alan's soft.
But that's the way our problems are, right? When we hold on to them, even a small thing becomes a big, big thing. When I was mountain biking this weekend, when I started this mountain bike, again, it was somebody else's bike. The seat was super uncomfortable. It was like, tilted the wrong way. And I'm like, okay. So I told my buddy, I'm like, it's all right. It's killing me, but I'll just keep going. And I'll just, tough it out. I will tell you, I never would have made the full bike ride had I not stopped, because my friend was like, listen, you're going to be miserable. Just stop. Let's adjust it. He had a tool to adjust it, and it made all the difference in the world. I know that even though it was an annoyance at first, it would have been such a big deal. I wouldn't have been able to enjoy the bike ride. I probably wouldn't have been able to finish it. So if you don't fix those problems early on, they only get worse, and they prevent you, and they become truly big obstacles. Okay, that's my big takeaway. And I share this with you just from my own mistakes in life and business. I can't tell you, in running businesses, I can't tell you how many times where I had a problem, maybe it was a problem employee, and I knew it. And I let that person be a problem for way too long. And I never looked back and said, oh, I should have given them more time. Never. It was always, wow, I should have reacted faster. I knew it. I knew it was a problem. It wasn't going to change. It wasn't going to go away. Yet I made a decision not to do anything about it early enough. And it became worse. So
we got another question for you, John. Amy, can you
yes, sir.
From Gary?
Yeah, it says, if leadership starts at the level of self, what might be that fundamental first step?
I think you've got to think about, and it's a lot of the things that we're talking about, but I think what is, and something I was going to mention in a little bit, I would start with, how do you take all these things in your life that you want to make better, and even list them out on a piece of paper, do a brain dump and say, okay, I want to make my relationship better. I want to get my health in order. I want to eat better. I want to educate myself more. I want to focus more on work. I want to wake up early. And just think about, what's the one thing on this list that I could do or tackle that would make everything else either easier or not even necessary? Okay, so I'll repeat that again. What's the one thing on this list that I could do that would make everything else easier or totally unnecessary? Okay. So, yeah, and I'll give you an example of that real quick. So in my day, there's a number of things that I want to do from a health standpoint. I want to get a good workout in. I want to get to bed early and get good night's sleep. I want to drink water. I'm horrible at drinking water, so I've got this big thing, and it forces me. I do everything short of just attach it to I should attach it right here, and then I won't forget. So you guys have it too. So I want to drink more water. I want to eat better. I want to have more energy. So these are all things that I want to accomplish through the day. What I found is, if I do one thing, it helps trigger everything else to happen. And what that one thing is if I work out early in the morning, it triggers everything else. Because what's really cool is, if I work out early in the morning, it forces me to go to bed early that night. I have more energy through the day. I tend to eat better because I'm more conscious of the fact that, I've worked out. I want to eat better for the day. I drink more water. I drink 50 ounces at least, if not 100 ounces during my workout. And I feel better. I get my workout better done in the morning. So I figured that one thing out has this ripple effect on everything else. So I would say, long answer to that short question, that's how I would approach it. Take one step that's going to help impact a lot of other stuff.
John, one of the things that has always, since I started working with you and talking to you in general, your ability to ask questions, like with humility. Even today, you're like, this is going to be a dumb question, Kev, but like this. Where does that fit in the grand scheme of being a good leader in terms of asking quote unquote dumb questions, but also answering maybe quote unquote what people think are dumb questions?
You know what? I think it's essential. I think the days of the leaders that are propped up as these know-it-alls with big egos, invincible, untouchable, you know what they are? They're unrelatable. They're unapproachable. They're unattractive. People don't want to be around those types of people. I think that's the old days. People want leaders that are humble, that are human, that are authentic, and those are the people they want to follow. So if I, as the leader, am not willing to ask what I might think are dumb questions, then my people are not going to be able to ask those questions. They're not going to want to ask me those questions. And then everybody pays the penalty for that, right? We don't learn the stuff that we need to learn. So if we drop our egos, I always have a saying, check your ego at the door. I don't care how good you are, check your ego at the door. It has no place in the room that I want to be in. And I don't want to surround myself with people like that, because that prevents people from getting better. So the moment you feel like you're that good is the moment you're going to start, turning down, where you can't, to that good where you can't ask questions. So.
Right on. Amy, we got another question, I believe, from Aaron Griffin, the one and only.
Yeah. Could you share how you start your days? Do you follow a similar routine in the morning? If so, what is it?
I do, yeah. So here's my routine in the morning. I don't. I wish I could wake up at 4 or 5 in the morning. I'm not a morning person, so I force myself to get up at 6. I go work out. That's the first thing. I got my stuff ready. I go work out, get a great workout in. I come back. I take a cold shower, which just gets me like energized. And that's something I learned from somebody else. I sit down, then at 8 o'clock, roughly 8 o'clock is when I start kind of my work day. I'm back, I've done my workout, and I start with reading for 25 minutes. There's a technique where 25 minutes of time for somebody like myself who has AD&D, that's the time frame I work out best. I then do a list of 3 things that I'm grateful for that day. Then I do 3 things, successes from the previous day. And then I list out 1 thing that I want to accomplish for that day. And I do this in my journal. So I do a daily journal. And then I wish I could say I am a great meditator. I'm not, but I'm a good visualizer. So I visualize an outcome of what I want. So I'll do that with everything, a presentation like this, a day, how I want it to go. But that's my daily routine. My morning routine.
John, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So when we first met, I think we talked about this because I'm just so nerding about leadership. And I think we nerded out. Yeah, I don't know if that's a word.
I don't think so.
You and I were nerding out a bit about different leaders, JFK, Abraham Lincoln, all that kind of stuff. Who is your favorite leader and why? And I believe you told me, but I'm curious because I've forgotten.
It's hard for me to say one person. I've got a lot of leaders that I would put together in one. I love someone like the people aspect of an Oprah Winfrey, who I think is incredible influencer for positivity. I look at people like Jack Welch, who built GE from nothing to something unbelievable. I love the out of bounds thinking of Elon Musk and Steve Jobs. The integrity of a Norman Schwarzkopf back in Desert Storm. So I think that probably that's a compilation of a whole bunch of people. JFK, of course, another great one. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Good question. Yep.
You have another question, Amy? I saw something pop up, but I didn't see what it was.
I think that was.
No, it just says thanks, John.
Perfect.
Okay, you got it. So let me bring up another area that I look at. The 4th area is attention, and what we give and pay attention to. And this is people, and it's also things. And here's a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. First of all, when it comes to people, you have to make a very conscious, deliberate decision on who you are going to surround yourself with. And sometimes you have to pluck the garden of life, which means pluck the weeds out of the garden of life, which means there are sometimes people in your world that are toxic to you. And we've all had them at times. And toxic people or negative people will impact you. Absolutely. There's no question about it. It's just a question of how much and for how long. So if you allow that, then you are making the conscious decision that you are going downhill with that ride with them. I think that's key. You have to surround yourself with people that you want to be, people that give you, maybe bring out a certain trait in you love. Those people where you're around them, they make you feel better about yourself. That's what it's about, right? Business people that are better than you. It feels good to surround yourself with people. I don't know how many of you played sports. I was at times the best player on the team. I was also at times the worst player on the team. I grew a lot more being the worst player on the team. I didn't like it, but I grew a lot more and I became much better and then became the best player on a team. I think you have to be conscious of that. Sometimes when you surround yourself with people, the wrong people, that affects you. It absolutely affects you. What I also think about is I separate things into 3 buckets, and I hear people sometimes stress about things that they have no control and no influence over, and they dwell on these things. So if you think about, there's 3 buckets. There's things that I have control over, absolute control over. There's things that I don't have control over, but I have influence over. And then there's things I have no control and no influence over. So I don't have, if I'm running a business and I set an appointment with a client, if that client no-shows me, that can really affect me. That can be, or then maybe they change their mind. That can be really unfortunate, but I have no control over that. I might have a little influence over their decision, but if they decide, maybe they, whatever, overslept or something like that, I don't know. I can't ruin my day thinking about that. If it's raining for 10 days in a row, hey, that stinks. I hate that, but I'm not going to let it ruin my day. I don't have any control over whether it rains. I don't have control over the taxes. I don't have control over the stock market. I don't have control over those things. What are the 3 things that we all have control over? Who can tell me? You have 100% control over this. Alan.
What we think, what we do, and what we say.
You got it. Spot on, my friend. What we think, what we do, and what we say. Nobody can control that, right? I control that of you. They can influence it, but you have 100% control over what you think, what you say, and what you do. So what's beautiful about that is, and I can influence other people, but if I just say that, hey, what goes on up here is totally up to me. Great book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. He was a concentration camp survivor. It's an easy read and a great read and a life-changing book, where he realized in his worst of times, when he was being physically and mentally tortured, horrific things being done, they could control his freedom. They could control what was happening physically. What they could not control was what was going on up here. If he wanted to plant himself on a beach drinking a Mai Tai, he could do that. And he gained so much power and control and freedom because he realized that changed his life and now lives of many other people who have read that book and listened to him. So what I think about is, how can you change your perspective on things and focus on the things? Successful people focus 90% of their energy on the things they can control, 10% on the things they can influence, maybe 10 to 20%, and 0% on what they have no control and no influence over. Why? It's a waste, right? If I have no control, no influence over it, why spend my time doing it? What I also think about when it comes to attention is what we pay attention to is ultimately what we tend to do better at. And I think about, like, in your life, what types of things do you track? What types of things do you actually look at, pay attention to? And I'll give you some examples. How many of you track your finances? Okay. Your finances, probably the likelihood of them being in better shape because you track them, whether it's your expenses, your income, your net worth, whatever, the likelihood is long-term you'll be more successful. How many of you track how many calories you ingest each day? I started doing that. I was horrible about it. I never did. I started doing it, and it's eye-opening. I use this app called LifeSum and track my weight, track all my nutrients. I don't like it some days, but over the long term, it helps. Absolutely.
No more 24-inch subs.
You have no idea how many calories are in a 24-inch meatball sub. That was a day and a half. Yeah. But it brings your level of awareness up. So if I track, how many of you have tracked your time? How many of you have done a time task log for your day? Eye-opening. We all give ourselves credit, and this is just human instinct. We give ourselves more credit than we're due. So if I asked you, hey, how good are you with your diet? You're going to tell me what you think is an honest answer. But if we went back and looked at it, chances are you're not quite as good as you think, right? And I'm speaking from personal experience. This is not a reflection on anybody else other than myself. I learned this from myself. I will look and say, wow, why did I gain a pound this week? And then I'll look back and I'll be like, well, I did have pizza, then I had ribs, then I had fried chicken, then I had blah, 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 nachos and a few beers and blah, blah, blah. So, okay, now I get it. I just was kind of blinded. That was in my blind spot. Okay, so we give ourselves credit. We don't think we spend as much as we do. If you've ever tracked your expenses, sometimes you look and you're like, wow, I didn't realize I spent that much going out to eat. But it's enough so that now it changes my behavior. I wouldn't know to do that unless I could stare at it and see it. So we are better at the things we track. Okay, so let me move ahead here to a couple other things. The fifth thing is preparation. So this is the fifth area that I see highly successful people do and they do it very, very well. Okay, now preparation means a lot of different things to different people. Has anybody heard the definition of luck? Okay, this is where preparation meets what?
Opportunity.
Opportunity, you got it. So what I can tell you is what you control 100% is your preparation, right? Do you control the opportunity? Can you control opportunities? No, I don't have any control. I don't even have any influence over opportunities typically, but I control my preparation. You know, in running organizations, I think to one manager that worked for me, that very good manager. And at the same point, he was not preparing himself effectively for a promotion that he wanted. And when that time came up, and it was a big opportunity not too long ago, and to be honest, it was, you know, it was within the last year here, he could have gotten that, but he did not do the right preparation and ultimately lost that opportunity. Right? So that was a missed opportunity because of lack of preparation. How you can prepare is a few things. One is you prepare your day, right? So I go into a day, there's some people that go into their day and they deal with things as they come up. They're kind of in the passenger seat of the car with their day. Has anybody ever had a day like that before where you're like, I feel like I'm just playing defense all day? And then you have other days where you're like, wow, I just nailed it. I crushed it. Because everything I wanted to get done, I did. And maybe it wasn't even a long day. It was just a burst of time where you were zoned in. You were in the driver's seat of your day. You knew what you had, a mission. And those are the days that successful people live by. They repeat those types of days. It comes with planning. It comes with planning not only their tasks that they're going to do, but also their mentality. They plan what kind of mental state. They control what kind of mental state they're in. It's not like they wake up and they've got their A game. Nobody does. No athlete does. No, everybody's going to wake up on certain days and feel like poop, or feel like I don't want to do this, or feel lack of motivation, or whatever it is. It's how you deal with that and how good you are at changing your state. Figure it out. What are the things that you need to do? Is there somebody you need to talk to? When I do a big presentation, I have a routine I go through. There's certain people I like to talk to. There's certain things I like to look at. There's certain things I like to listen to. There's certain things I like to visualize, and all of that there's certain things I like to eat. There's certain things, exercise I like to do. That helps get me into my peak performance state. So you can control that. What's interesting is athletes, how much time do they spend preparing? Professional athletes? 95+% of the time they're practicing. They only play 5% of the time. Think about it. Football, hockey, baseball, basketball, doesn't matter. They're performing so few. Now, most of us work the opposite. We actually are running our lives and we're working, but we're actually not preparing in a meaningful way. We're not spending time on self-development. We're not spending time practicing. For those of you in sales careers, how many times do you practice your sales pitch? If you're doing presentations, how many times do you practice presentations? If you have a tough conversation as a leader, do you know when I had tough conversations that were really important, I would role play those conversations, literally. I'd have somebody, a mentor, somebody that I was working with, hey, I got this conversation. Can you role play this with me and make sure how's this coming out? I did it. I've done that my whole life for 20+ years in business, because I know the second time I do something, I'm always going to be better than the first time. But do you realize how many people, unsuccessful people, tend to just wing it on really high pressure, on high important, meaningful stuff in life? They just wing it. You can't expect a peak performance result if you're practicing like an amateur, or you're not practicing. You know, it just doesn't work. It doesn't jive. So, okay. Here's the last thing the last key to this is what I call leverage. Really successful people are great at creating leverage. And this is one of these that means a lot of different things to different people. So I'm going to give you some examples of what I'm talking about here. I look at one strategy to get leverage is I can delegate to somebody else, right? How many of you feel you have trouble delegating to other people? Okay, I do big time. I always have, even as a leader, as a company leader. I then ultimately, though, got better and better and better at it. I'll give you an example. I just moved into this place in North Carolina, and I had a party that I wanted to invite all my neighbors to and stuff like that. And I've got a lot of friends down here. So it was starting off as a small party. And I'm like, I haven't met the people on my street yet. So I had this vision that I was going to go walking up and down the street and knocking on every door. And, hey, I'm John Laurito. How you doing? I just moved into the area. Just want to say hi, meet you. And by the way, Saturday night, I'm having this get together, really informal. Love to drop by. Well, there's 20 homes on this street. And, as the week went on, I was busy as can be. And then Saturday afternoon, I'm like, I still haven't gotten around to say anything to anybody. I haven't invited anybody. So I'm like, I guess I'll just forget it, because I felt like I needed to be the one to do this. And my daughter and my niece were there, and they're like, Dad, why don't you just let us go? We'll go invite people. We'll go up and down the street. I'm like, all right. I kind of felt like it should come from me, but I'm like, all right, go for it. And they came back and they're like, Dad, everybody's coming. I'm like, what do you mean everybody's coming? They're like, we went to every house. They're all coming. I'm like, well, how many people is that? They're like 25. They're all going to come here. They're going to be here in like an hour. I'm like, wow. Okay, great. That's awesome. So it ended up being fantastic. But what I realized at that moment is I was not willing to delegate, which would have resulted in none of my neighbors coming. And even though I felt that my daughter doing it was less effective, it turned out to be more effective. It didn't need to come from me. It's a great example. Sometimes we don't delegate because we think that I have to do it. If somebody else can do it 70 to 80% as good as I can, then why not put it in somebody else's hands? That's how great leaders operate. They just give other people ownership of stuff, and then that frees up their time to focus on developing other people, vision of the organization, helping you develop your own life, all kinds of stuff. I'll give you a couple other quick tips. I think about ways where I can get more done in a shorter period of time. I know Kevin knows this. I think Al knows this too. I listen to books on Audible, and you set it at like 1.5 times speed. So I figured out I can read a book in a third of the less time, because I'm reading it at a faster pace, and your brain just picks it up faster. Does anybody tend to work out and you listen to books or podcasts while you work out? Anybody do that? Okay, that's a great way. I see Mo's hand go up. So that's a great way where you can do that. So you can find ways where you can get more out of a task. My workout might be better, probably because I'm doing that, and I'm getting good stuff put in my brain, right? I'm reading a book. Great example of a way to do that. I think about, if I'm going to work out for an hour, there are things I can do to make that 1 hour workout better, right? I can choose to work out with a great partner. I can choose to work out at a certain time of day. I can choose to work out with different equipment. So it's not just the time. That 1 hour workout might be better than 2 of my old workouts, 2 hours of old workouts. There again, I'm creating leverage. Think about how you run your day. I used to be in a business where I had to make phone calls and I had to meet face-to-face with people. And I figured something out which helped me do both of those much better. When I went from a meeting to making phone calls after the meeting, I was really bad at making phone calls. I just didn't have the motivation. When I flipped that and said, I'm going to make phone calls and then have my meeting, I was better at the phone calls and I was better at my meeting, because the phone calls kind of warmed me up for my meeting. So I could do an hour of calls and an hour of my meeting, and depending on how I ordered them, the results would be much different. That was it. All I did was change the order of the tasks that I did. So think about how you run your day. There might be things that all you need to do is a little tweak. I need to flip-flop these 2 things. Maybe I need to work out and then read, or read and then work out, or whatever. Whatever the example might be, that's going to help make those 2 tasks a little bit better. All right. That makes sense.
Any questions? We got 4 minutes. Any questions? I know Alan and I can hammer some, but I want to give a chance to anybody else who doesn't scream questions out constantly.
John, this has been phenomenal. Thank you so much. Just wanted
Good, man. My pleasure.
Tactics, John. I love, if you any 6 ways to do anything, I'm in. Even if it's like.
Does anyone have a final question?
Thank you, Mia.
I do have one if you guys don't, but please, we want to encourage you to ask yours. I've been guilty of making sure all my questions get asked in the past.
All right. Oh, look at that. Please tell us the name of your podcast again.
The name of my podcast is Tomorrow's Leader, and you can find it everywhere you find podcasts. And it's produced by my friend Kevin here. Just does a phenomenal job. I have the easy part. He's got the hard part.
Hey, John, me too, man.
No, you don't mess up, so it's easy. You know what I mean? When you send it, it's usually 99.9% fire.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man.
Do I have a chance to hammer the question?
You know what, man?
If there are
If you
none?
want to make this all about you,
Super quick.
I suppose we
Super
can.
quick.
Yeah.
So, John, this is something I wanted to ask you. I asked this to Dean Graziosi, and I've been noticing that the questions I'm asking myself are having a huge impact on how I go through my day and how I lead my day. I've started asking myself a question of where am I negotiating with myself? Where am I lowering my standards? Where am I not following through, but I should? Where am I outside of alignment? Things like that. What's one question that you've asked yourself repeatedly in the last 25 years, 10 years, 5 years, whatever it is, that's made the biggest difference in your life that we can all take with us today?
Here's a great question to ask. If you weren't afraid of failure, if you knew failure was not an option, if you knew whatever you did, you were going to succeed, what would you do? That, to me, I ask that question all the time because it helps me think about, because fear is the thing. Fear of failure is the thing that stops us from doing so many things. If I knew whatever I did was going to be successful, what would I do?
I can vouch for that too. When John and I first met, I met John at his place of work. And I remember you saying, like, I really want to do this podcast thing, but I'm afraid. And you're like, that's honestly, I know that's just me telling stories, so give me a little bit of time. And that's when I knew, like, yeah, it's people like you that, number one, you make the difference because you're so honest with yourself. And number two, it's a pleasure working with you because you take ownership. I think that's like my favorite thing about John Laurito. Amber's got another question. Amber, hammer it.
Well, we can't hear you.
There we go.
Okay, yes, sorry. I wasn't sure if I should ask or type. I was like trying to type it away, but I don't think I asked it fast enough. I was just wondering, how do you manage like the unexpected when like managing time with family or friends? Like when you have like your day set out, right? It's planned, but there's always other things. Maybe your family needs you, or maybe your kids need you, or something like that. So how do you manage the unexpected but still keep going and keep your stride?
Great question. Absolutely great question, Amber. Don't be too tough on yourself. I look, this comes back to values. So if family or kids interrupt, I mean, that to me is most important. Now, if you've got to still put boundaries on what you're doing, but don't be too strict. I used to map out my day, my whole week, where every minute I was doing this and this and this. It's unrealistic. You're never going to do that. And I found that if I have a few key things that I want to get done, but I build in enough flexibility, number one, I'm much happier and my likelihood of doing it goes up significantly. And I can deal with those interruptions and the unexpected things a lot easier, and it doesn't stress me out and make me a crazy mess.
Right on.
Wow. I love that. Thank you so much. Boundaries with flexibility. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah.
We got to head out. Where can people find you on social media? What do you do in terms of coaching? Plug away, my friend.
You got it. Thanks. So I work with people on a one-on-one basis to help them lead themselves better. I work with people in all aspects of life on leadership. I also work with companies to help them run their teams better and develop better leaders. And then I do speaking engagements. So I love what I do. You can find me. We talked about Tomorrow's Leader. That's my podcast. And then I'm on Instagram at John Laurito, JohnLaurito. And then you can find me at lauritogroup.com, Lauritogroup.com. And all my info is there. Feel free to email me, call me, anything. Here to help.
And on the LinkedIn machine too. You're on the LinkedIn machine.
LinkedIn machine also. You can find me, John Laurito. So message me. I'd love to hear from you.
John, we appreciate you taking the time. Absolute fire. Absolute fire. Could not have oversold it. And clearly you definitely smashed it. So we appreciate you taking the time, man.
Thanks, guys. I love you guys. You guys are doing phenomenal stuff. Keep up what you're doing for sure. It's impacting a lot of people.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone who attended. Thank you, Amy, for sending the messages.
Yes.
Thank you, Tiff, for everything you do and the emails. Like, you guys all made this possible.
Great questions, too.
Yeah.
Great questions. And as always, we do not have fans. We have family. We love you guys. And as we always sign off, bye.
Talk to you next week. Thanks again, John. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys. Take care.